Hello, everyone, and welcome to ETF BILD's webinar, the Fireside Chat with Kirsten Wegner of the Index Industry Association, and John Jacobs, instructor at Georgetown University and former EVP at the NASDAQ All-Mex Group. We're going to discuss the primer that they co-authored about the origins and benefits of indexing. The primer is an unbelievable piece of paper to remind us about the breadth and scope of indexing. And one of the things that I've noticed when I went through the paper was the incredible amount of use cases for indexes just beyond the financial markets. So I'd love to get into the discussion with the co-authors of this paper to really kind of dig into what's happening in the index industry and where we are going. So Kirsten, why don't I start with you with a full introduction of
Sure.
who you are and what IIA is, and then we'll move over to John.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. And I'm such a big fan of ETF BILD, so it's really wonderful to be here today. I appreciate this time. So I'm Kirsten. I'm the CEO of the Index Industry Association. We have members all over the globe, actually, and many people might be surprised. You mentioned the number of use cases. There are actually over 3 million indexes, which is just such a large number, right? There's so many indexes out there. And the mission of our trade association really is to educate the public on, what is an index? How do indexes work, kind of the exciting evolution of this space. And so that was really the germination of this report. And Professor Jacobs is just such a luminary in this space. So he was a natural co-author.
Okay, and John, what about you? What little introduction and what brought you into this project?
Around luminary, but thank you, Kirsten, thank you, Richard. And again, obviously, ETF BILD, our mission has been to highlight issues and topics that may not see the light of day in the index or ETF world. That's our specialty. I was just a quick background. I've been in this business for 40 plus years, a long time, and was at NASDAQ for well over 30 years, and did spend a lot of time at Georgetown University as well, doing various things. This has always been part and parcel to everything that I've done in my career, and so I was delighted when Kirsten asked me to help out on this paper, because I think it is absolutely mission critical for people to understand, and indexes are going to continue to be relevant as they are today, but more and more relevant to the future.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we mentioned about these use cases and the breadth of this industry. So Kristen, can you kind of highlight a few of them that are sort of germane to your membership?
Absolutely. So I mentioned the 3 million number. Now, there aren't that many ETFs, right? First, you have to kind of separate the index from the investment vehicle tied to the index, like the ETF. So we're talking just the indexes, which are the statistical constructs. So some of those use cases might be research. It could be benchmarking for economics. It could be used by academia, policymakers. And then many in the public are familiar with those indexes that are tied to investment vehicles like ETFs, right? And when we look at those indexes tied to investment vehicles, there's so many different use cases in the passive investing space, active investing space. And we're seeing this proliferation of index products on thematics, whether it's, also investing in private versus public markets, digital asset indexes, AI. There's just something for everyone right now. So it's really an exciting time when you kind of zoom in on the use cases.
And I'll add one more use case that I got to experience myself, which is brand building. So early on, NASDAQ was not a well-known stock market. Today, it's one of the most valuable brands on the planet, especially financial services, one of the most valuable brands. And when we started looking at building the index business, and our goal was to help build the brand of NASDAQ, the recognition and the attribution around the NASDAQ brand. And back then, and this is the late 90s, you could invest, millions of people a day would say, how's the market doing? And they say, well, NASDAQ's up and S&P's down and Dow's flat, but you couldn't invest in NASDAQ. So investors were hearing this every single night on the news, thousands of times a day during the market. And so we decided to start one of the ways you could do that is to put a NASDAQ branded financial product in the marketplace. And to Kirsten's point, we launched QQQ, which is an ETF, and then we launched a future, and then we launched a couple of options products, and so on and so forth, where today there's over 25,000 products on indexes, on NASDAQ indexes alone. So it's been the greatest extension of the NASDAQ brand that has existed. So it is not just about being able to measure some part of the economy, and we'll get much more detail later on today, but it's also a way to recognize and build branding around some segment of the economy. So it's been really exciting to watch that happen, and it would not have happened without the NASDAQ composite, the NASDAQ 100 index. Would not have happened.
Yeah, and what's interesting now from the Qs going forward, this evolution that we've seen, right, from equity markets into fixed income into commodities. Now we're going into digital, right? And what comes with indexing, right, and the most important part is the intellectual property that an indexer has around their methodology, and those methodologies are evolving as well. So can you, Kristen, start with you, and then John, talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in that world of, I'll call it creativity in methodology.
Absolutely. It's a very sophisticated process. We detail it in the report, right? But there are very clearly articulated methodologies and governance structures for these indexes. Because at the end of the day, end users want to know that this is coming from a trusted, reliable, independent, and transparent source, right? So people might ask me all the time, well, this is a statistical construct. Can't you just press a number on like Chat GPT and get it? And the answer is, no, there's so much human capital involved in this very sophisticated process at arriving at these numbers. And it is a very robust process, as John is quite intimately aware with his background with QQQ, right? So it is, I think, confidence building for investors that they know that there is this process and this independence and transparency behind the indexes that is like separate from the investment vehicles.
Oh, I think that's exactly on point. When you think about the work that goes behind, if you're at an index, or whether it's an equity index or a fixed income index or a commodity index, the work you have to do to determine what is the pool of securities you're going to use, and what are the or data points, and what's the methodology you're going to use, and what's the weighting scale, and all those kind of overlays. And then you have to work in, well, different products have different restrictions and so on and so forth. There's a huge amount of intellectual property, of brain power and creativity that goes into designing these indexes with the idea of, one, measuring a segment of the market, and then two, being able to create investment and trading vehicles for investors from, mom and pop all the way through the most sophisticated traders to use and actually action those particular indexes. So it's one of the most creative, innovative parts of financial services. Absolutely.
And two, I always love to talk to young students, and John, you being a professor, talk to those students all the time, where people ask, what are the future career paths? What do I need to major in to get into this field? And if you look at some of those majors for anyone listening who wants to get into the field, it's really quantitative analysis. It's very, mathematical, CFAs. So it's really quants that are in this industry. And I think that is part of that broader technological trend we're seeing of a shift from finance degrees to tech and mathematics degrees.
Couldn't agree more. It's math at the core of it, and quant, and the ability to sift through. There's 3 million indexes, right? There's unbelievably numbers of data points within those indexes and within different data sets. And I'm not just talking equities, could be cryptos, it could be any data set you can turn into indexes with a thoughtful and disciplined process. So it is pouring through that data to get something that is relevant and that works and that is then actionable.
Yeah, and I think the innovation that comes from indexing is from the underlying data. And we're constantly getting new data sets and competition in the industry to have access or create those data sets and have the rights to those data sets. So it's an interesting part of the evolution of the industry, is the diversity of the data that's available to us. And Chris, I really like your point about it being in academia. Again, when we talk about use cases earlier, that's one that we often forget about. Academic research, the importance of academic research, not just in the financial industry, but you can go off into life sciences and all other places. And the use of indexes and data for those research purposes becomes a very important part of what indexes are all about.
Studying indexing is growing across the country in different academic institutions as part of the academic curriculum. So whereas 15 years ago, there was never, or 20 years ago, there was never any conversation, maybe a section of a finance class, as Kirsten, you pointed out, but now there are actual index classes and talking about indexing and quantitative analysis of different segments of the marketplace, because at the end of the day, every single financial decision, acquisition, merger, investment, et cetera, at some point is going to involve using index and the underlying data.
And I would add to that even, right? Like the value of data has never been higher than it is now in this AI economy where data is the raw material going into the AI systems and where we have such incredible rapid change, right? The paper goes over this, not to belabor the point, but indexes came about in the 80s. They're nothing new. And at that time, the idea of a railroad system seemed radical in an age of like horse-drawn carriages, right? And the indexes emerged as a data source for the public to keep track of what then seemed like this unfathomable change, right? And we're now in another industrial revolution, whether it's AI, DeFi, you name it. And when we have such rapid change, we do need that data to apprise ourselves of the change, right? And the models are so sophisticated. And with AI systems, that data as that input has never been more valuable.
I think you're exactly correct. Going back to the Qs for a second on bridge right to crypto from QQQ. Early on, people would say, and we launched the Qs during the lead up to the tech bubble, people would say, I don't know which NASDAQ stocks to invest in, that I can't keep up with everything. And so when we came up with the NASDAQ 100 product, the Qs, people looked at it and said, oh, so I don't have to pick a NASDAQ stock. I could invest in the basket of NASDAQ stocks. And so NASDAQ has already done the work to come up with what are the 100 largest non-financial stocks in NASDAQ, et cetera. Investors make the choose using the index. The same thing applies today with crypto, right? People sit there and say, it's a new world to me. And how do I invest in cryptos? And which crypto do I buy? And now we're seeing all sorts of data providers who are coming up with, consolidating the data underlying, and you're seeing that there's, indexes on different cryptos. So people don't have to pick a crypto, they can pick a basket of crypto. The same thing happens. Kirsten, to your very first point, about how indexes are still continuing to be relevant and creative. As every new market segment comes up, indexes are a great tool to help define that market and help give investors choices and opportunities. Indexing has been around since the 1880s, and I certainly expect this conversation to be occurring another 100 years from now. Anyway, that's why it makes it so exciting. It's so dynamic, and it's so relevant, and it's right on point.
Yeah, I think in your conversations, you guys brought up AI, and I think that's a question that comes up a lot from people is, well, can I just use AI? I can build my own index. I mean, how is AI going to integrate itself into the industry and really help innovation more so than take it away from current providers?
I see AI as a tool for humans. It's a way we have more vast sets of data than ever before. It's a way to help efficiently analyze those data sets and help with the rebalance, help with the data inflows, any step of the governance process that's already in place. But it's not like really a replacement to the humans that are involved in the process. So as we have more vast data sets, the more there is a demand also for the AI to analyze it. I know, John, you've been very much in the weeds on AI with your students, so I would love to hear what you think.
No, I think you're right. And so remember, as we used to joke around and say, anybody with a PC and a spreadsheet can create an index. It doesn't mean it's an index that will work or that can be monetized or can be that's accurate. Same thing today. Yeah, sure. Type in something that ChatGPT or any of the other AI tools, and they'll come up with an index. But that doesn't take into consideration all the things that go behind it, the analysis of the underlying. How do you weight something? Looking at the details. Just because you create a number doesn't mean that number can be actionable, and so on and so forth. So again, I think AI is great for screening and coming up with some initial screens, and they're tools to assist, but they're not going to replace the humans who are actually doing the detailed analysis. And as AI continues to grow and develop and become more and more sophisticated, that will just free up the human element to become even more creative on top of that, et cetera. So again, it's another tool. Before we had spreadsheets, we still had indexes, and then we had spreadsheets, and then we have different other technologies that keep moving along, and AI and blockchain are just the latest technologies that all get integrated into the world of it.
Yeah, and that leads us to this sort of bigger trend that we're seeing now in the financial industry, is the use of thematic indexes, where they're really getting granular about inside a specific company, where they're getting the revenues from, a specific grouping around a specific theme. So it really goes to the use of AI, but also the use of the human in order to depict these thematics, which are becoming very big investment product in the marketplace today. So can you talk a little bit about sort of this evolution of thematics that we're seeing and where we're going with it?
Sure. Well, I think the index industry is very nimble. And as you mentioned earlier, there's robust competition amongst all of the various index providing firms. So I think they're ready to go to meet the market wherever it is. And there is definitely demand for different thematic investments, whether it's defense, robotics. John mentioned before the QQ, to get snapshots of these emerging areas of innovation. And so I think we're going to see more thematic indexes, more specific to tailored niches. And you can really create an index for anything, right? Like if you have the parameters investors for what subset of the industry you want to analyze, you can go and do that. So I see a large, large potential for growth in thematics. And John, I'm not sure what you think about it, but you also see that otherwise.
Oh, no, I couldn't agree with you more. Thematics is continues to be important and will continue to be important as people want to target and pinpoint. And think about this for a second. Say you invest in the SP 500. Just pick equities because it's the easiest example. Pick the SP 500, the 500 largest or 500 large stocks that S&P has determined should be that benchmark index. It's beta. It's in every finance textbook that there is. But suppose that is made up of 11 subsectors. Each of those could be a theme. Those subsectors then can be made up of those sectors can be made up of subsectors and further down. So if you want the ability to go along in a certain area and short in another area, you need to be able to categorize and measure those subsectors and those microsectors and further down to determine what you want to invest in, how you want to go long, short, and all those kinds of things. So again, it starts off with being able to measure some aspect of the economy, some aspect of economic activity, and then the ability to create products on it to allow investors to do that in their portfolios. So again, it's just going to get more and more detailed and more finite. I think so. I think we're like third inning of thematic. We have a long way to go.
And John, you're making me think of a new term of art. We've got the mid cap, the small cap. Maybe that in the future there'll be like a nano cap to refer to like a nanoparticle version of a market, right?
Yeah.
So I think, but the AI is assisting us in having that level of granularity and the human judgment as well as the co-pilot. So
right. So then bridging from that, Kirsten, think about the equities we can access readily today. Private capital, right? Private equity. Or private companies. There are more private companies and private credit instruments out there than there are public companies. So those, if we determine how we can get data sets, and we can determine how we can construct those and start to determine how to create products around them. So again, you'll be able to measure. There are many industries where there's more private companies doing economic activity than public companies. So, and it goes across every different asset class. So anyway, I think that, indexing is going to play that first step in creating that and allowing that to happen. A basket of private equity versus individual private equities and so on. So again, thematics will help, I think, lead the way.
And I'll add to that because private markets is something that gets me very fired up, right? And we know,
Sure.
Jadkins has spoken about, this year at Georgetown, I believe at your market structure conference, about how the number of public companies has dropped by half since 3 decades ago, right? So there is kind of this sense of a desire not only to promote more public companies, but also to give access for investors to that private market. And as we're seeing access open up, the investors expect the same tools they have for the public markets, for the private markets, right? So they want the indexes and the benchmarks to be able to have measurements to make informed decision-making on those private market investments. So I think that is part of, again, that innovation and competition to meet the market where the demand is. As we see more entrants into the private markets, we're seeing, I think amongst the industry association, about half of our members are now delivering private market indexes or having plans to deliver private market index products. So that is a big shift this year. And it's something exciting, part of that broader private market trend.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to basics. The original Charles Down, the original indexes were created to measure railroads, et cetera. There was a gap. How do we measure? How do we know how things are doing? How do we measure one particular railroad company versus all the railroad companies to know which ones are doing better than others? It's the same thing today. We want to measure different things. And so indexes tend to fill that inefficiency in the marketplace generation. So I think that's, again, it's a perfect example. And I'd wager that of the IA members, the half that are doing it now or plans to do it 2 years from now, it'll be 75%. And then eventually every IA member will be working in the private equity because it's part of what they do. It's their mandate to work on the next asset.
Since you bring up railroads, can I make the pun, mind the gap? I couldn't resist, mind the gap.
Define the gap and then jump in.
Define and mind.
So, we're talking a lot about financial investing, financial markets, but what about, and you mentioned it before in the conversation about an economic measurement. What are we going to see? We're having problems now with government data and government indexes and what's being released and are they fair? Does the index industry start moving into those sort of economic measurements that may not be financial markets, may not be a financial product, but will be a more reliable measure of economic activity? And do we see any movement around, some of those traditional government indexes that need an overhaul?
It's a really fascinating question, right? I can't speak for the government decisions, but I think the index industry is pleased to be a resource to have those independent and transparent benchmarked so informed policy decisions can be made. So that's another example of a fantastic use case.
And to further expand on the point, so when the jobs report comes out, or when it came out, remember there's all sorts of other ones. ADP has their own one. There's a whole slew of different private market reports that come out that also bolster that claim or um, give more insight and color into what that roll number is saying, et cetera. So I already think that that data companies are already providing a lot of alternatives, and I think that's just going to continue to grow. I mean, the government statistics are a statistic or a set of statistics, but there's plenty of other statistics out there that's going to continue to grow. I think it's and every one of those numbers, if you look at it in certain ways, is an index, right? You could just turn into and consider it an index. So I do think there's going to be a continued growth of private data that steps into that world that pretty much is dominated or at least benchmarked by the federal government.
Let's talk a little bit now. We got a little bit of a background about the index industry, talk about some growth engines. Where are we going? Right.
Well,
I mean, we know where we've been. We know what we've evolved into, right? That's been our discussion now. So where are we going?
I think we're going to see a lot of geographic growth, right? We're seeing a lot of ambitious agendas around the world. We see the Saudis have their 2030 economic agenda to bring more investment there. We see in Europe initiatives to expand retail investing and this kind of shift from a savings to investing mindset. I think globally, we see a ton of idle capital right now, which is bad for individuals who have cash sitting in accounts, and then also for those economies of underutilized capital that could be invested. So where are we going? I think we're going to see more government initiatives to encourage investment. And I think that within that narrative that the index industry is perfectly positioned, right? For all the reasons that John mentioned before. If investors want to have access to investment vehicles tied to indexes, they can have diversified exposures regardless of what their investment choice is. They can pick a thematic and go in it with diversification, right? So I think where we're headed is more adoption of products related to indexes and global growth.
I agree 100%. As you look at around the globe, and the American markets and then Western markets are the envy of the world because of the transparency and the certainty and just the robustness and rigor and vigor around our markets. And that will be replicated. More and more countries around the world understand the key to a great economy is excellent markets that allow you to trade different asset classes, whether it's commodities or equities or fixed income. And as that all comes online, the index providers will be there to provide the first benchmarks, the more comprehensive benchmarks, the normalizing the data sets, et cetera. And that will then turn into investable products. So you can invest in the basket and the underlying, no matter what the asset class is. So I think the world is we're still early days when it comes to global indexing across asset classes and geography.
So, John and I are both co-founders of the ETF BILD project, along with Justin Mice of Buttonwood Communications and Bib Strench of Thompson Hine. And our objective, the ETF BILD project, is really to help service the underserved. The industry has gotten top heavy, both on ETFs and indexing. The biggest players are getting the most market share. So is the industry causing a higher barrier to entry with that? Are we going to see more smaller firms with more innovation? Or is it also going to remain? So if Saudi Arabia wants to do something, they're going to go to MSCI, they're going to go to S&P, right? Where are the innovators going to come in from?
Well, the Index Industry Association is poised to help educate and bring in new innovation, right? Both from new market entrants and helping the legacy players innovate. So I'm seeing a lot of optimism for new entrants, especially in the Asia Pacific region and in digital assets. So I think those are two areas where we're seeing new market entrants. And I think at the end of the day, technology is a great equalizer as people have more access to technology, whether it's at the individual level with phones to be able to do investments online or at the entrepreneurial level to be able to have more access on how to start a business online. I just think we're going to see a natural progression to more innovation and competition. And I think that's a really exciting and positive trend.
Yeah, I would agree. I sit in another role I sit on some ETF boards and we look at the products that come to us for approval to go out and hit the marketplace. And you'd be surprised at how many are small, innovative, entrepreneurial index shops that have come up with their own intellectual property. They access the data. They're trying to come up with a way to come up with some theme or some investment strategy. And they've created their own index. And then we go to one of the members of the IIA to calculate and disseminate it, et cetera. But we're seeing the innovation on that part of the index world. And I'm sure that IIA is looking casting a wider net in general for for other indexers, because there's a lot of small indexers out there who are really driving, I think, a lot of the creativity in the index space right now, and then partnering with the larger players to make it, easier to access in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I'll add one. I'm sorry, Chris. I'll just add one to that too. Is coming out of academia, right? I've personally been involved in a university that's created its own index. There's others. University of Chicago's got the CRISP indexes, and I think maybe there's an opportunity, as we talked earlier, that more and more classrooms are popping up with indexing and financial markets education. That from that is going to be coming some more innovation, some more new ideas.
I mean, I think if we're looking at the future of workforce, that's something I've always cared passionately about, right? One concern with AI is it, on a fundamental level, could take out some of the entry level jobs, right? So I think it's really incumbent on the industry to create those pathways for career exposure to graduating students about industry. So I think it's great to have index classes at the college level and postgraduate level, right? So people can understand, how does the industry work, make connections with some of the players, because those are really the future pipeline of talent for the industry that create the robust future we want. And so I think the IA, we have a continuing education program that we have online that is free for access to anyone who wants to take it to learn more. And we have a new series of videos coming out next year. And we're also really looking forward to initiatives in 2026 to help expand access and kind of career exposure to the index industry, because I think that's something that is really important, especially in the era of AI, where the entry-level job market, there's some anxiety. So we really need to create that pipeline and pathway that people can learn about the industry.
That's great. I want to thank you guys for participating. Maybe some final remarks to summarize where IIA is with your membership and what you're looking to create over the next few years from that organization. Then John, yourself, a background around the industry, your participation in the ETF industry, and what you see going forward. So Kristen, why don't you?
Thank you. So I think takeaways, right? This is my finishing out my first year at the IA, and it's been wonderful. But first and foremost, I want people to know that we exist. We've been kind of obscure to many people, right? So the Index Industry Association is a resource to everyone in the index industry and the broader ecosystem to learn more about indexes, to learn about the exciting innovation. And we're really trying to democratize that information with, our learning modules online and in-person meetings. So we are there to be a resource. And I think, industry perspective wise, it's never been a more exciting time to be in the index industry, right? We have so much innovation. I think so much, whether it's DeFi, digital asset, AI markets, there's really something for everyone as far as these niche sectors. So I invite people, I guess, to come and look online at indexindustry.org, where we have this report available, our continuing education, because the best way to plot a career path or an entry into this area is to learn about it. And so I want our site to be a resource over the next 1 or 2 years for people who are thinking about entering this space or innovating.
Well, indexing is so important that if the IA didn't exist, it should be created. So I'm glad you guys do exist. And it's and you're the only organization, to my knowledge, on this planet that solely represents indexers and the data providers of indexers. When, as we talked about, it's such a key part of the economy. I have a long history in ETFs and other exchange traded products and other index products, whether it's options, futures, and so on, even to the cryptos today, et cetera. So I continue to see the future of this industry is that it's always easier to look at baskets, and it's always easier to open up markets by doing a basket and then individual investments, no matter what the asset class is. So I see just a huge opportunity ahead as new asset classes and new geographies open up. The indexers will be there. The products will follow. Investors will have the ability to have more choice and at lower cost, because index investments are always less expensive than actively managed products. And so I continue to see a really bright, rosy future. I think all, in this case, a rising tide is floating everyone's boat here. So I just think we have to keep it going. And it all comes down to the data and the index.
Well, thank you again. And ETF BILD, thanks you both for participating in this and sharing your insights, which is wonderful. And for the audience, thank you for joining us. And again, if you'd like to read the primer that Kristen and John wrote, you can go to www.index.
It's indexindustry.org.
Industry. I was going to say Index Association. I'm like, that's not right. But please go to their website and find that paper and read it. It's a great read. So again, I appreciate everybody's time and thank you very much.